there are so many people who are either in temporary accommodation on the streets or just doesn't have substandard accommodation. There's a report today saying that that's 300,000 families in the United Kingdom, 180,000 children in temporary accommodation. Now, Prince William has taken this up as an issue. He's formed a charity, Homewards. He wants to renovate 250 homes in the next few months. It's a 5-year project. He started in Aberdeen, and I know about it because I'm in Scotland. I went to Sheffield to work with him when he launched his project in Sheffield. And he is committed not only to providing homes for people, and we are going to furnish them through our charity, but he also wants to prevent homelessness. So that's about getting people jobs. It's about giving people the kind of confidence to go out into the world and getting them off the streets, if that's where they are at the moment. And, you know, what Prince William has done is really interesting because just as his mother took up causes that were never really reported very much, like HIV/AIDS and landmines, and she took up homelessness, he's taking up causes that he is making people understand something that otherwise, without his intervention, wouldn't be understood. Mental health, the environment, and now homelessness. So it's a great pleasure for our charity to work with his.
You're talking there about issues that people don't really understand. And I just think that's quite interesting in relation to homelessness, because often there is a bit of a stereotype about people who are homeless, that they are drug addicts, that they've refused help. I just was quite struck with what you said about the number of children who are homeless.
The number of children, 170,000 in England and 200,000 or so in the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, the reason that people are in trouble is usually something unexpected, unplanned happens in a family. You could have cancer, you could have a death, you could have a redundancy, you could have the breakup of a family. These are all causes of emergencies and crises. So some people land up on the streets. Mothers have to leave maybe because of domestic violence and they become homeless. Children, of course, some are put into care, which is a very expensive way of dealing with something if you can keep the family together. So what we've got to understand is there are so many unexpected, unplanned for, you know, things that happen in people's lives. Now, if people have resources, they can cope with it. If you've got savings, you might be able to do something about it. But I was always struck by 1 in 4 people with cancer who are under 65 are also people who are officially in poverty. And so they are pushed into very difficult circumstances. But it's the children, I think, Prince William and I are most worried about.
Someone who's sleeping rough on the streets, you know, in a sleeping bag, maybe on a couple of cardboard boxes to try and keep warm, you know, that's a symptom of a society that is kind of broken down in some way, right? That because other organisations will have failed before that, whether that's, you know, the NHS, social services, housing, education, whatever it is. What do you think it says about the state of Britain?
Well, it is possible to deal with homelessness. You know, when we were in government, we actually reduced it very substantially. It has risen partly through COVID, energy prices, everything else in the last few years. And yes, nobody should be, particularly children, should be out there vulnerable because they're either in really bad temporary accommodation and being moved from place to place, or actually young people out on the streets. So it does say something that we've got to improve the healthcare. A lot of this is mental illness. We've got to build houses. So the government is committed to building, I think, 180,000 new homes. They're spending $39 billion in the next 10 years on social housing, so that's a good thing. But you've got to also deal with the problem as it arises.
Another area you're very passionate about is child poverty. And just last week in a speech, you made clear you thought the 2-child benefit cap should be lifted in full, not partially, which has been mooted in recent weeks. Is this an area that you think rises above the cost, that it just has to be done? Well,
how we treat our children, just as how we treat our old people, is, as was just being said, it's a verdict on the state of your society. And if 4.5 million children are in poverty, you've got to do something about it. Now, I'm actually confident that the Child Poverty Review that the government rightly set up immediately they came into office, it's taken some time, it's going to report in the next few weeks. So I am confident that the 2-child rule will be addressed. And I'm confident that breakfast clubs, help with free school meals, family centres, all these things that I think are really important to the upbringing of a child. I'm confident that this report is going to do something about it.
2 areas I've seen you speak again in a speech last week that you think would be worth doing: gambling taxes and also the banks levy you think could go up.
Well, I've been responding to government consultations. So the government had a consultation on child poverty and I responded to that. The government hasn't yet got a policy, so I'm not trying to tell the government to change its policy. I'm saying this is the new policy and this would be a good way of doing it. Gambling, they also have had a consultation on that. So they've asked the public their views and I responded. Now, gambling causes some social harm, and I think the Gambling Council that came before the Select Committee of the Treasury were not prepared to admit the social harm that's caused. So there's a big case for change, and I think I was making that case, but I'm responding to a consultation. The government wants to make a change. What is the change will come out, I think, in the budget. But I believe that the gambling industry has made huge profits. A lot of them are based in tax havens. They use a thing called transfer pricing to reduce what the profits look like, and they're very profitable anyway. So I think they can well afford to pay a tax. And I want that money to go to child poverty, because you've got something where there is potential for social bad, because you've got addiction, you've got problem gambling in some of the poorest communities. So move the money from, if you like, the bad by taxing it and put it to good, which is children taken out of poverty.
Yeah, as you say, it's all kind of linked, isn't it, with the drivers of poverty and stuff as well. And you were just saying, I know you're very careful not to be a backseat driver, and you don't want to.
I don't want to, and I do respect.
And I get that.
She's got huge issues to deal. Look, in the last year, it's quite incredible what has actually happened. Defence and security has become a huge issue. Now, if you say you've got to increase your defence expenditure from 2% to 5%, you know, that's 180 billion pounds. That's bigger than any budget for schools. It's just as big as the budget for the English Health Service. So she's got these huge problems to meet. And then you've got tariffs. You've got what's happening in America, and protectionism around the world is affecting British exports. So she's dealing with new circumstances, and I think that's got to be respected. But I'm not going to comment on the individual items. You know, there used to be a period when I was Chancellor when nobody talked about a budget before.
I know, and now it's changed. True.
Yeah, and one Chancellor had to resign when he gave out the figures of the budget in advance. So I'm not going to be the backseat driver. Can
I ask you a question that isn't about the budget, right? It feels much bigger than that in some ways. Do you think there's a discrepancy in the UK where, you know, the amount of tax that we think we should pay and the level of public services that we expect are kind of out of whack? Like, we want to pay US taxes for Scandinavian public services.
This has always been said to be the case. It's always a balancing act. You know, I did 11 budgets, believe it or not. So I was a Chancellor for 10 years. And you've always got this dilemma, because you want your public service to be good, and they've got to be efficient, and particularly the health service, because we've got a unique health service in Britain. And I think anybody who's looked at health services around the world thinks that a health service that's free at the point of need is something that really means that if you're ill, you don't need to worry about whether you have money to pay for the service you're getting. And then you've got tax, and people don't like tax. You know, I had to put up tax to pay for the National Health Service, and we allocated money from National Insurance to the Health Service. And of course, it was popular at the time because people knew we had to do something about the Health Service. But of course, after that, people thought, oh, well, I'm actually paying more tax. Why is that? You know, so you've got to balance this all the time. It is a balancing act. And yes, Europe has got high level. Look, France, I think, is 45% of national income. We're 37% of national income. So we're much lower tax than France and most of Europe, where I think the average is about 40%, and we're about 37, maybe 38%. But of course, we want to have European levels of public services, and that's it's a natural thing to want, but it's a balancing act. And I respect Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer. They're having to make very difficult decisions.
Can I just quickly, to wrap things up, ask you a little bit about the BBC? I think it's fair to say that President Trump has played some role in the pressure that built on the BBC in the last week.
He plays a role in just about everything at the moment, doesn't he?
But is that okay?
Look, trust is what matters here. If you're a newscaster or a broadcaster, and this is true of Sky, it's true of every broadcaster, true of ITN, true of BBC, you've got to be trusted. And I think the problem that the BBC has had is this happened a year ago. And an apology should have been made instantly. If a mistake has been made, you've got to apologise instantly. And then I don't think Tim Davie or the head of news would have had to resign, because they would have corrected the mistake immediately. It went unreported, unacknowledged, unapologised for. And I think that is where trust becomes an issue. So the BBC, you are trusted by the country, more so than politicians. You are trusted, and you don't want to lose that trust. It is so important. So a mistake, if it's made, and people will always make mistakes. I mean, Glastonbury was a mistake for the BBC. The Princess Diana interview, remember, years ago was a mistake. And you know that your reputation depends on being trusted to give proper information and not fake news. And when you make a mistake, I think this is the real problem here. A mistake was made, but an apology should be made immediately. And a year later, it does cast doubts about whether we responded quickly enough to a problem.
Does this solve the issue, or do you think There's an institutional bias, which is a term that's been used.
I don't personally think there's an institutional bias. I think, you know, everyday news, we're talking about isolated incidents over a period of time, and you can blow that up into being a sort of huge crisis. But I think we can solve this problem. But all the time, we've got to think we're in a world of fake news, social media, propaganda, people sort of putting their opinions across and not based on information, and a lot of people are responsible for that. So you do need the trusted broadcaster, and that is your unique selling point. Both of you and all the rest of the journalists who work for all the different broadcasters, we depend on you being trusted, and we depend on you being accurate. And you will make mistakes. I'm not saying you'll make mistakes.
No, we
but
will.
We will.
Mistakes will be made, but they've got to be corrected immediately. So a year's gap is just not good enough. I think that's the problem.
It's been great to have you on, as always.
It's a
Really interesting to
privilege.
get your thoughts
Thank
on
you.
things. Thank you.